Hi guys, today we're talking about root rot, which is something that when you first get into plants we're all like terrified of. I mean, it is still quite terrifying, but over time you begin to give less of a shit about it because it is something that you can recover from if you are aware of it. I think the thing about root rot is it's being aware of it and knowing that it's not like the worst thing to have to deal with. So I'm just going to go through a few of the causes and treatments and that kind of thing because it is kind of confusing unless you know a little bit. So when I learnt about semi-hydro, that really kind of cemented in my head how root rot happens and how to stop it and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. So the cause of root rot is not overwatering itself. The reason root rot happens is bacteria in the soil rots the roots of your plant. The bacteria thrives in low oxygen environments. So it's not overwatering itself, it is when overwatering reduces the amount of oxygen in the soil, that causes the bacteria that causes root rot to thrive. So whilst bacteria is the cause of root rot, we also kind of need to understand what makes the bacteria thrive. And obviously, like, overwatering is the big one. And overwatering isn't giving your plant too much water in one go. That's not really an issue unless you think it'll take a really long time to dry out. So in winter, it's more of an issue because it can take months for the plants to dry out, or weeks. I suppose months. But it's more watering your plants before they're ready. So a good rule of thumb is to only water your plants once the soil is dry. There are exceptions to it, like plants like calathea and ferns aren't massive on drying out, but even they would prefer to dry out a little bit rather than be overwatered, which is why I tend to use a moisture meter. I know they're not massively accurate, but when you're a beginner, they're really, really useful. So for the sake of like a tenner, I think they're a really good investment. So overwatering can be a cause if you're watering, especially if you're watering like weekly, or I mean, I see people watering their plants daily. That is just, in a month, they're going to be just rotten. There's going to be no roots left and they'll probably be beyond saving. So try to get in tune with your plant's needs rather than what you want to provide for it. So it's all overwatering that causes this bacteria to thrive. It depletes the oxygen in the soil. But the sort of causes for the depletion of soil aren't necessarily giving your plant too much water. The density of the soil is another thing that can cause lack of oxygen in the soil. So you can aerate it. A lot of people recommend using chopsticks to break up the soil. But I think it's better to have a good soil mix. So you can buy houseplant potting soil if you don't want to make your own, definitely. But I would recommend getting some perlite or some orchid bark and adding a bit in just to break it up a bit. It just creates little air pockets so the oxygen can grow. Air pockets for the oxygen to be in and stop the bacteria that causes root rot from thriving. The air pockets will also help the soil dry out faster, so it's just a really easy way to stop your bacteria from really getting a hold. The other way we can be overwatering by proxy is if you put your plant in too big of a pot. It's really tempting, especially if you have a plant that you know is going to get really big and you don't want to have to buy a load of pots if you know that it's going to grow quickly. It's really tempting to just put a plant in the biggest pot that you think it will ever need and then just leaving it, but don't do that. You end up overwatering it by proxy, so you will put far too the soil can hold so much water and the plant just can't use it, so the soil will stay wet for ages and deplete all the oxygen. So don't do that. There are some plants that deal better with being in too big of a pot than others, but there's trade-offs. So Monstera really aren't that fussed about being in a massive pot, provided you're not watering them too often. This here is my Monstera Adansonia, which is desperate to be in the frame. But what they will do is, it seems to be specifically Monstera, but I'm sure other plants do this too. They like to be snug in the pots. They don't like to have a lot of excess soil. They probably know that that's not good for them. So what they'll do is they'll concentrate on growing a shitload of roots and no foliage. And it can be quite disheartening, even though Once it's decided that it's got enough roots, it will probably start shooting out new growth quite quickly because it can. There's often like a few months in the interim when you're like, have I killed you? Like, what are you doing? So just whenever you are uppotting a plant, don't go any bigger than like an inch or so. And I say an inch, but if you've got a plant that's in a tiny baby pot, then just like a centimetre, like a half-inch increase will probably be plenty for it. And I know it's frustrating and annoying, especially for plants that seem to grow really quickly. Syngoniums are the worst for this. They do not like being in a pot that's too big for them, but they grow really quickly, so you can end up repotting them like 4 times in a season, and it's annoying, but yeah. If you don't like uppotting plants and it's just too stressful for you, you're worried about it, you can just propagate the plant so it isn't as big and it won't require the same amount of roots. Or, controversially, you can trim the roots. I don't. I'm considering starting to it because I have plants that I like the pot they're in and I don't want them to get any bigger. And a lot of people are like, no, you mustn't cut the roots, like it's really bad for the plant. If you cut too much off, yeah, but if you just cut off, you could even just like give it a haircut, just take it out of the, just cut off the bits that the roots that are coming out. If you really don't want to uppot it. It's up to you how you deal with the roots, but don't drown the plant in soil. It won't like it. So the next thing to talk about is how to tell if a plant has root rot, and it's not easy because there are only so many symptoms a plant can display, and so every symptom could have a wide variety of causes. That's just it. The most common one with overwatering and therefore root rot is yellow leaves, but it's not necessarily I found the most likely reason a plant has got yellow leaves is that the leaves are just old, and this is most common in those, I always mention Monstera, but I think because they're such a common houseplant, they're a sort of good one. A lot of people have them, and often they've got those tiny little leaves right at the bottom, and they're often bright yellow. They're dying / dead, but it's not because the plant's unhealthy. They've just come to the end of their life. Like, leaves don't last forever. So if you've only got 1 or 2 yellow leaves, your plant's probably fine. It's when they're all starting to yellow and generally look really sad. And when plant leaves are coming to the end of their natural life cycle, they tend to put on really exciting colours. Amazingly for me, I currently have no plants with yellowing leaves from old age, but there we go. But yeah, the colours are just more autumnal. They might go through stages. The Micans one that I mentioned and don't have, they go bright pink. Alocasia poly leaves also go like a reddy yellow orange. They do like a whole cycle of colours, and that is probably why the plant leaves are going yellow. If it's a sickly, sad looking yellow and it's on a lot of leaves, then it could be root rot. You might also see black start to creep up from the tips of the leaves with a yellow edge. It can be a sign of fungal infection, but if you're new and you don't think you've got your watering right yet, chances are it's root rot. The biggest symptom of root rot, the one that you're most likely to see if you're a beginner, is that your plant simply has died. If you can pick it up like this and the top of the plant comes away from the roots, like it just separates, that's root rot. The roots have literally just rotted away and the leaves have got nothing to attach to. And some plants can deal with it better than others, but I have found that the plants that deal with it well for a long time will just suddenly decide to die, whereas plants that show root rot really, really suddenly, you can generally bring them back. But that is like a generalisation. You might also get a rotten smell. I would say most plants don't smell rotten unless you actually smell the roots, like take them out of the soil and smell them, and by which time you can see they're rotten, so it really doesn't matter. So I wouldn't rely on smelling the soil. I would look for yellowing and black spots on the leaves. If you think that your plant has got root rot, it does not mean it's going to die. There are things you can do depending on how far advanced it is. But I have had plants that have had all the roots rotted away and they have come back, but they do require a little bit of TLC and you need to keep an eye on them. The first thing you need to do is get the plant out of the soil. The soil is harbouring the bacteria that's causing the root rot, so you need to get as much of it as you can off the roots. I have in the past just dried the soil out and put the plant straight back in the same soil and not had an issue. But I know a lot of people would recommend repotting in fresh soil. So that's entirely up to you, depending on how tight and lazy you are. So plant roots tend to be white or yellow. Some are bright orange. A lot of Syngonium roots are like bright orange. Some are green. I've got a little Hoya. This is a crinkleate, but it's not growing very crinkly. And here are the roots. And they're sort of white and healthy. Now, water roots are whiter than soil roots. But, oh, there's a little baby leaf. Little baby leaf growing at the top there. Cute is that? I'm not even pointing to what it is. There. Little baby leaf. But the rotten roots will be rotten. So they'll be brown and they'll be mushy and they'll probably smell weird. Now, sometimes you can actually pull the rotten sheath off and there's a healthy root underneath. But in general, I just chop off anything that doesn't look 100% healthy. You may end up chopping off a lot. If you don't chop it all off, it will just continue to spread. So be ruthless. You will need to dry out the soil if it's slopping wet. Like I said, change it if you want to, don't if you don't. I actually don't. I rehab my plants in water, not in soil. So I tend to just discard the old soil, let it really dry out again, and then reuse it probably for another plant and just hope it doesn't spread. I rehab plants in leca just because, or water, it's easier to see the roots. It's not that it's better for the plant, it's just easier for me to see how well it's progressing. The reason I use leca over water is plant roots can also rot in water if you don't change it up enough. And I'm terrible at remembering to change water, so I just prefer leca for that reason. Keep the water level below the plant roots. The leca will absorb the water, but there's obviously like gaps between the leca balls, so there's plenty of oxygenation. That is not a word. Anyway, an extra step you can take. I don't do it, but if you have a plant that's really struggling with root rot and you feel like you're going around in circles, you can bathe the roots in hydrogen peroxide to kill off the bacteria. I use 3% hydrogen peroxide to just get it off Amazon, and then I use 1 teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide to 250 ml of water. So like 1 teaspoon to half a pint. Just dip the roots in and it should be okay. This is also good for pests. I don't use it that often because I'm scared it'll burn the leaves. I had to use it on my philodendron tortum because it was covered in aphids and it didn't work, but it also didn't damage the plant. So maybe I have defective hydrogen peroxide. Who knows? I might try a stronger dosage, but I wouldn't recommend other people try that until I've tried it. And that is the 1 teaspoon to 250 ml of water is pretty standard in the houseplant community, so that is what I'll recommend. Yeah, so the 3 stages will be cleaning off the old roots, the mushy growth roots, soak in hydrogen peroxide if you want to, and then rehab the plant in leca. You can try in soil, but as I say, it's really hard to tell how it's doing. And that leads us on to a point that a lot of people ask about, and it's something that is, you sort of struggle to get your head around it. Once you get it, it's fairly obvious, but that is, why don't plants that are grown just in water, why don't they get root rot? And the answer is, well, for a start, they do. Plants in water can get root rot as easily as plants in soil because the cause of root rot is the same. It's bacteria caused by lack of oxygenation. Oxygenation. Is it oxygenation or oxygenization? I was looking for my phone, but I'm filming on it. Anyway, so that's why it's so how rude. It's a fly. That's why it's so important to change the water because oxygen depletes in water. If you're lazy and you don't want to change the water often, you can get an air pump. That adds more oxygen to the water, and that can actually promote plant root growth. So if you have a plant that has root rot and you love it and you don't want it to die, get a little air stone and an air pump. Don't spend a lot on air pumps. If you've been here a while, you'll know that my boyfriend has aquariums. He's had aquaria I'm really struggling with words today. And so we have tried pretty much every air pump on the market, and I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, they are all noisy. Unless you're wanting to spend an absolute fortune. And even then, after a while, it will start making a noise. You'll plug it in, you'll be like, oh, it's silent. 2 weeks later, So I'm just warning you now, they all make a noise. Don't spend a lot. You can get little kits for like a tenner on Amazon. You just stick an air stone in the water and it'll just bubble, and it'll oxygenate the water, and that will promote root growth. That's why I grow my propagations in an AeroGarden. It's basically a fancy air pump. The reason that plants in water don't get root rot from overwatering is that they have a different kind of root. So if you grow a plant in water, it will grow water roots. Water roots, it's basically the difference between us. We breathe through our mouths and fish breathe through their lungs. It's basically a way of getting oxygen into your body. Soil roots get oxygen from the air. Water roots get oxygen from the water. If there's no oxygen in the soil, the plant will get, bacteria will build up and you'll get root rot. If there's no oxygen in the water, same thing, bacteria will build up and the plant will get root rot. So as long as both media have plenty of oxygen, you shouldn't get root rot. Yeah, that's right. And the most likely time you will lose propagations is when you move the plant from the water into soil, is that it's having to absorb oxygen with the wrong kind of roots. And you might notice a decline when you switch your plant from soil to water because it hasn't got the right kind of roots yet. But they'll grow and you'll be able to sort of see them grow. And I just find it a lot easier to monitor the plants when they're in water. I also think plants grow roots faster in water. I have no luck with soil propagation. So I just prefer, if I've got a plant that's struggling root-wise, I just prefer to have it in a situation where I could easily look at it, switch it up, change the water or whatever, rather than having to pull it out of the soil, which is stressful, and you can end up just damaging the roots just by moving it around a lot. The last thing I want to cover is how long does it take a plant to recover from root rot. It's like propagating and growing roots. It really just depends on the plant, and it's not necessarily the species. I can't root Rhaphidophora tetrasperma easily. I can do it. I've got an article on my website about how I finally managed to do it, but for 99% of the world, they can take a cutting of a Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, stick it in water, and a few days later roots grow. I just didn't have that experience at all. I had to have a whole system with like moss and leca and stuff before I could even get one solitary root to grow. The only one I've struggled with more is Monstera Peru, but I finally managed to root that in the AeroGarden. And it's been a good 6 months since it went in there. I don't know how long it will take your plant to recover from root rot, but what I can tell you is you may notice a decline because the plant doesn't have roots. It won't be able to support the existing leaves. And yeah, it means it's dying, but it doesn't mean it will necessarily die because it hopefully will be able to grow roots before all the foliage falls off and dies. When you are trying to get a plant to recover from root rot, propagation boxes are a really good idea. The plant will need light, it will need humidity, and it will need warmth. Those three things will really help it to not necessarily grow, but they will stop it from declining, and those are the best possible conditions. We want humidity to be about 65%. Temperature, I like about 22 degrees. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. I'll check my phone, but again, filming on it. I want to say 65. I think it's 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I think. What was the other one? Oh, light. Light. We don't want too much light because it can be quite stressful. So a cheap grow light would do well, or even just like a nice sunny windowsill. Plants want to live, so as long as they're not too far gone, they recover well from root rot in general. And sometimes the plants you wouldn't expect to recover well do. So I think all my cacti have had root rot at some point because I just used to go through phases of watering them all the time. And they recover really well. And I think it's just because they don't have a very strong root system. Just because of where they grow, they don't have a particularly deep root system. So they grow roots pretty quickly. I assume because if they're living somewhere arid and it's windy and they get blown around, they'll need to root quickly to be able to get some nutrients into them. So I'm guessing that's why that is. And then we've just got the usual suspects. So fiddly figs hate being overwatered, just like they hate everything. Monstera look terrible when they have root rot. They show it on the leaves really quickly, but they also recover well. The one that can massively go either way is alocasia. My dragon scale doesn't seem to be that fussed by watering at all, and neither does my stingray. She just needs to shift her thrips because God, she loves them. But alocasia poly, the Amazonica, I believe they're the same, but one's smaller. I think the poly is like a smaller version. She gets root rot at the drop of a hat and would not regrow from a corm. There is an element of practice. You will get better at recognising it, and as you get better at watering, it becomes less of an issue. But the one thing I will tell you to do is don't water too often. Stick your finger in the soil if it's dry, water it. If it isn't, leave it alone, and add perlite or orchid bark to the soil, and those would help immeasurably when it comes to root rot. And that is everything I have to say about root rot, I believe. The only other thing I wanted to show you is there one thing I have to show you? I think just one. And that is my aforementioned alocasia dragon scale. She's got 2 little babies. She's got one here, and then you can see the other one there. She's dropped out of a pot in there. Now she is in need of a repot, really. Oh, there's another one coming there. Oh, there's loads. There's another one there. Oh, there's soil everywhere again. That's just a leaf. So I've got another baby here. Got leaves everywhere. Right, so there's 4. This looks like one but isn't. Right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th one you can't see it, but it's just there. And then I believe there's another one. Yeah. And then if we look down the side, there is another one that looks like it's going to pop up. This white one here. So that's exciting. Alocasia is so weird. So I thought my dragon scale was dying because she just produced this crappy leaf, and then she's produced this new leaf, which is absolutely gorgeous, and a million babies. And I want to repot her, but also I don't want the babies to die. I think I'm just going to really gently, just, pick her up, put her in another pot, backfill, and then hope she doesn't notice. So that's really exciting. Oh, that was the other thing. I had a Zebrina, alocasia Zebrina, which I was ready to chuck out because she was just like a dead stump. And then I noticed the other day she's actually grown quite... hang on. Yeah, so she was just this dead stump for ages. And then I noticed that growing. I don't know how I missed it. But, yeah, alocasia seemed to do nothing. I mean, this thing has done nothing since probably this time last year when it produced a really crappy small leaf. And it's just taken a little while. So as long as you've got the room, I mean, this thing has like really strong roots, but I'm not that interested in having a pot of just roots. So I was ready to throw in the towel. I was actually ready to put her in leca, which I still might do. I haven't decided yet. So yeah. Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody has a lovely week, and I will see you next week. Bye bye.